Stick around to see how I made this beautiful duck call display made out of walnut, cherry, and padu. So one day I got a call from my little sister and she asked me if I could make her husband a duck call display. And of course, if your little sister asks you to do something, you do it because you love her. Since I'm not an avid duck hunter or hunter of any sort, I actually had to look up on the internet the dimensions of a duck call, just because I needed to know how big to make the shelves spaces between each duck call so, well, they fit. Once I figured out the dimensions that I wanted, I got to milling up the lumber, squaring it up on all four sides, and sawing it down to the proper size for the uprights on either side. And as I was cutting this particular piece of walnut, it started to jam up behind the riving knife, as you can see. So I know from experience that you don't want to shove your wood through a saw blade when it won't go. The saw blade is supposed to do the work easily for you. So I took a wedge and put it in behind the riving knife, because I've seen sawmills do this when they get their bandsaw stuck while they were milling up the wood. So I tried it and it worked beautifully. So I was very happy that that continued and I didn't have any problem with any of the rest of the wood for the entire build. So I broke out my brand new Crosscut Sled to do all my crosscuts, of course. And if you take a look at the Crosscut Sled, it has several little added extras to it that make it very nice to use. If you take notice, right in the middle of the sled, you'll see a strip of walnut that's about 1/4 of an inch thick. And what this is you can remove it and be able to angle the blade at any angle you want to without tearing up your sled and needing to make another crosscut sled just so you can make angled cuts. And then once you're done, you put that piece of walnut right back in, screw it in, and you're back to your zero clearance fence. So I really wanted to try dovetails on this particular build, but I didn't have enough time to try and learn or any patience to learn. So I decided to go with the rabbit butt joint is what I'm calling it. There's probably a real name for it, but that's what I'm calling it. And I wanted to figure out exactly where center was for each of the 3 shelves that I was going to do. So I had to go back to high school and figure out fractions and algebra and other kinds of math that I never thought that I would ever use again until I started woodworking. And if we were in the UK or pretty much any other place in the world, it would be much easier because they use the metric system. So once I got the calculations done, I got to cutting up the board and marking it and taking it back to the Crosscut Sled. So once I marked up where I wanted to cut the boards, I took it back to my Crosscut Sled and got to cross cutting. This is where the shelves were going to go, so I was just going to, instead of putting a dado blade in, which I can do on my Crosscut Sled because there's enough space, and that little piece of walnut, I'm just going to, mill it out. But I noticed that the rabbit and the curve cut were on the opposite sides of where they were supposed to be. As in my last video, Lemons to Lemonade, link at the top, I decided to make this a decorative element instead of redoing the entire side. And it actually turned out really nice in the end. You'll see. So I continued with making mistakes on all the boards on purpose. Once my purposeful mistakes were done, I used some wood glue and the Bidoof, slipped them in each of the curved cuts, and then flush cut them with my flush cut saw. And let me tell you, it actually turned out really nice in the end. Once that was done, it was off to sanding every bit of the display. Now I did come across a little chip out, and I glued that back in, and then put a little bit of wood glue, and then used my orbital sander to make it a nice smooth area, and I learned that little technique on YouTube. This split would not benefit from the wood glue and random orbital sander hack, so I had to improvise and break out the CA glue and use that instead. And one big tip that I learned, don't use your finger, or, well, you may get it stuck to the piece that you're working on, just like Tim Taylor did back in the day. So there was a wormhole inside of this piece of walnut that I was using, and I didn't want to scrap it because it would be okay. So I did a little trick once again that I learned on YouTube, and that was to use a little bit of CA glue and spray some accelerator on there and just keep building up layer upon layer in the void instead of using epoxy. It's just faster. And then it was time to mark where I wanted all the dowels to go for each of the duck calls. I think there were 27 or 28 different dowels. But this is another little hack that I did. It's a peanut butter jar with a hole cut in the side to suck up all the sawdust. Because if I didn't do that, there was just sawdust going everywhere on my drill press. And I kind of like to keep my counters clean. Let's put it that way. The floor, different story. Then it was time to put in all the little dowels to hold each and every one of the little duck calls that my brother-in-law has. Unfortunately, I did not think about how to sand around each dowel with the squeeze out from the glue, so I had to use a piece of sandpaper on a flat piece of board, and that kind of worked out okay. But my favorite part is now the finish. I used some Danish oil on this and just let it soak in, and everything just looks so beautiful. The cherry, the walnut, even the Padauk, just that little bit of Padauk, it popped out. In keeping with the lemons to lemonade tradition of my woodworking, when I cut the rabbets, I didn't like how they looked. They were just too wide. They weren't perfect. So I decided to cover them up with a little bit of Padauk, and boy, am I glad I actually did that, because once I put the finish on the Padauk, it actually looked like it was on fire, and it looked great.
Wow!
Wow, indeed. So I did one last sanding, put a final coat of Danish oil on, and we call this done. Thanks for watching my video, everyone. If you liked the video, give me a thumbs up. Ring the bell if you want to see more of my content, and a comment would be always welcome. So until next time, friends, keep being awesome, stay out of trouble, and as always, be good to one another.